There are moments in crypto where max pain isn't necessarily red candles, but rather the green candles that you didn't manage to buy. In today's video, we'll be going over the most recent Bitcoin price action, taking you through what I think could be happening next, and of course, covering our overall thesis on this market. If you enjoyed the content, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe. Without further ado, let's jump right into the video. First things first, taking a look at Bitcoin on these shorter time frames, you can see that we're just consolidating between this little zone over here between 104.5K down to sub 100K. Bitcoin is essentially just chopping around, and what I think is actually happening is this. Let's form a base here. I would like to see Bitcoin continue to consolidate around these levels before potentially making another move higher. Now, this is very, very interesting price action because you can see, although we didn't manage to break above 104.5K, you can see that we failed right around 104. The low here is indeed a little bit higher, potentially making the case for another double bottom. You know we like these double bottoms, at least in terms of shorter term price action. And just to show you my trade, in my free premium group, I actually entered a Bitcoin long right around 99.7K on Friday evening. A lot of the members actually went ahead and took some profits as Bitcoin crawled all the way up to $104,000. That was an excellent short-term trade. Reminder, if you want to join my free premium group where I trade the market day by day, you do have that first link in the description down below. You DM me the word premium and I would be happy to onboard you into my free premium group. But the point is, when Bitcoin came back down to these levels, it was a solid risk to reward trade setup in terms of going for a long. Now, what I am hoping here is that this can materialize into potentially catching what would be the bottom. We'll have to see how the price action develops because right now we are essentially right in the middle of the range. You can see that the top of the range is here, the bottom of the range is here, and what do you notice? We're just chopping around right here. I'm still seeing a lot of bears in this market calling for it to be over. However, I'm starting to also see a little bit more optimism on the bull side, hoping that we can form a base here, which is currently my base case as a matter of fact. Now, we talked about this very, very important level, and that is the 50-week moving average. You can see that every single time that Bitcoin loses its bull market support band, we end up coming lower, tapping into this green line, which is the 50-week moving average, and moving higher from there. Right now, at the time of recording this video, we cannot ignore the fact that we are actually below this level, and you can see that the candle is right there. However, we know what typically happens on Sundays. We've seen it time and time again, where we get at least some form of pump. I'm not promising anything, but usually on Sunday evenings, we go ahead and pump into the weekly close. However, going into the week, we've seen those pumps retrace. The thing that makes me relatively optimistic here, outside of this potentially forming some kind of bottom, is the fact that if we take a look at the CME chart, the current price of Bitcoin is actually right around 101.7K. And you can see that we closed right around $104,000. And so even if Bitcoin is to go back lower, sweep some more liquidity before potentially moving higher, I do find it hard to believe that we don't at least close this gap. We've been closing every single gap to the downside. Now we have a gap to the upside. And so going into the week, I would be expecting Bitcoin to at the very least make it up to $104,000 once more as we continue to chop around within the current range that we're in. Right now, if you're not already positioned, it's okay to wait for confirmation. Now, what would be the first sign of strength for Bitcoin? That would be if we can manage to hold above $105,000. Not just another wick up, but actually managing to close several hourly and 4-hourly candles above this level, then we can start targeting $107,000. 107K is absolutely pivotal because then if we can hold that level of support, we're talking about targeting the bull market support band, which is above $111,000. My point is, even if all of the bears are right and we're moving lower, I find it hard to believe that we don't get at least a little bit of a move higher beforehand. That's in terms of my leverage trading position. So you can see I'm currently sitting just over $50,000 in profit. I also have my Bitcoin dominance long, which is executed on Bluffin. Reminder, if you want to trade the crypto markets, you do have the second link in my description down below. You get the absolute best bonuses with me, and I know a lot of people have been affected by this market recently, and so we do have a 20% trading bonus cashback where you can get $500 completely for free to trade with, and it's limited to the first 100 users that sign up with the second link in my description down below. And so taking a look at Bitcoin again, I really would like to see us break above this 50-week moving average above $103,000 and hold there as support if we are to see some more upside. On the shorter time frames, we just talked about it, but chop, chop, chop is the name of the game. Now, there is a lot of liquidity getting built up on both sides here. The market is relatively split. We have some upside liquidity, but we are starting to see a little bit more people starting to consider longs as Bitcoin tries to form this base right now. On the 48-hour time frame, it does show us that we do have a pretty big cluster here just below $100,000, and you can see that there is a lot of downside liquidity. However, if we really do zoom out on the 30-day time frame, it does paint a little bit of a different picture, which is what we've been talking about on the channel at length, and that is there are a lot of shorts to be grabbed. And I also think that if Bitcoin were to move up from here, we would see more shorts potentially pile into the market around key levels like $107,000, $105,000, which is where we should be expecting some kind of resistance. So ultimately, I want to see how this plays out. This is pretty normal stuff in terms of the liquidity. On the 7-day time frame, there is still more shorts in the market, but you can see that people are starting to get a little bit optimistic sub 100K, adding to their longs. And so I would like to see Bitcoin confirm either below $100,000 or above 105K. If Bitcoin can manage to move up from here, I do think it would be absolutely epic, and it would leave a lot of people surprised because there's so much bearishness on the timeline. That being said, we cannot ignore the fact that this is just a range and we need to be patient until we can make our next big move in this market. If you're new to the channel, just a reminder, my invalidation for the bull market is weekly closes below $98,000. Now, I know a lot of people are also talking about this 50-week moving average, which we just covered, and that is 103K. If we start to get several weekly closes below 103K, a lot of people would be throwing in the towel and calling for the cycle to be over. That's perfectly okay to use as well. However, you need to be careful because this is a pretty important weekly structure shift. And so that's why I'm keeping 98K as the key level that I'm looking at. If we break below there on a weekly time frame, I will be pivoting my stance in the market and changing my overall trading strategy. Now, I also quickly wanted to talk about the death cross. Typically, when we get a death cross, which is when the 50 moving average moves below the 200 moving average, that is the point in time where we find a bottom in the market if the market is to remain bullish. You can see on my Bitcoin chart that this green line over here is the 50-day moving average, and this red line is the 200-day moving average. And so, right now, if we are to take a look at the price action, every single time that we end up crossing over in this bull market, it has marked local bottoms before we go ahead and move higher. You can see here we crossed over down below, local bottom. We crossed over down below, take a look at this wick, nice local bottom before we went ahead and moved higher. And right here, same exact scenario in March. We ended up crossing over, local bottom. And now what we're seeing is if we zoom in, we're about to cross over once more. And so potentially on the shorter time frames, we can still have some wicks down below before potentially forming a local bottom, and then we go ahead and move higher out of here. Until we get the confirmed weekly closes below $98,000, that is currently my base case. And with this current Bitcoin price action, you can see that the crossover is about to happen in just a matter of days from here. So let's see how it all plays out. But ultimately, I still think that what we're trying to do here is form a bottom. Now, if we start to see people go aggressively long and the longs start overtaking the shorts, at that point, it's only a matter of time before we grab downside liquidity and then potentially move higher. But for now, the liquidation charts are relatively even on the shorter time frames. On the longer time frames, you can clearly see that there is tons of liquidity to the upside to be grabbed. So we need to be extremely cautious here in terms of our trading positions. That's why in my group on this most recent Bitcoin trade where we entered sub $100,000, I advised people, if you want, you should be taking profits here, especially if you're risk averse. For me personally, I am very interested in trying my best to catch this bottom, and if we can manage to do so, it would be absolutely epic. That being said, I have my invalidations, and if I get invalidated, I will be looking for different kinds of positions in this market. It doesn't matter if the market goes up or down, I am a trader, and therefore I can make profits both ways. Now, I also wanted to go over this interesting Coinbase institutional tweet. Here's what they said. October's sell-off wasn't the end of the cycle. It may have been the reset it needed. Excess leverage flushed, fundamentals remain intact, and institutional players are quietly rotating back in. Smart money is clustering around EVM chains, RWAs, and yield protocols, pointing to selective re-risking, not retreat. Key takeaways. Leverage is cleaner, but liquidity gaps remain. Capital is rotating, not entering. Selectivity remains critical. Macro risk lingers, but structural demand continues to build. We think this is the base building phase before the next leg up. not a cycle top. This is coming from Coinbase Institutional. Coinbase are amongst the players that are actually running this market. And so if they're telling you that the top is not in, do you think that the top is in? Just food for thought. Now, right here, you can see Bitcoin is still right around $102,000. It's not time to get quite excited yet. That being said, from a risk to reward perspective, as I've been continuing to reiterate across my past few videos, if we are going to move higher, it would be indeed from around this base. That's how you should be thinking about all of your trades. Risk to reward. This is a key level. Can we wick lower? Of course there's a chance. But ultimately, I am gunning for this to resort to the upside after we just managed to shake out most of the market participants. And in the meantime, we also have Saylor coming out and saying buy now. And of course, we do know that JP Morgan disclosed $343 million of Bitcoin ETF holdings. That's not that significant to be fair, but I just thought I'd share it with you anyways. And that sums up today's quick video. I firmly believe that Bitcoin is trying to form a bottom here. Until we get those weekly invalidations, I will not be pivoting my stance. That being said, we closed last week at around $104,000, and we've seen that these CME gaps do tend to get filled to the downside and to the upside. So I would be expecting at the very least for Bitcoin to go ahead and revisit $104,000 before telling us what its next move will be. We also have Coinbase essentially coming out and saying that the top is not in, and we know that these guys are massive drivers for the market. All this while most of the liquidity continues to build to the upside, although we are seeing a couple more longs starting to pile into the market. If you enjoyed the content, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe. It should be a very, very exciting week. And remember, if you want to know how I leverage trade, you have a tutorial right here. I'll see you in tomorrow's video.